Hello, my friend. My name's Zach, and I started dating my wife at 17. Now, as you can imagine, not so great at communicating. Now, I've learned a lot over the years on communicating through coaching programs and books, along with trial and error. And that's a nice way of saying sticking my foot in my mouth. Today, we're going to cover how to get that foot out of your mouth and how to thrive in your communication. Because it is possible and it is important. First, I just want to discuss that there's a couple differences that you might find between you and your wife, or you and your husband. And that's first just to know that there's an internal and external thinker. I am an external thinker, which means I think through my lips. So it's flying out of my mouth. And here's the problem with that. Well, there's lots of problems with that. But one of the main ones is sometimes I say things I don't even really think. It just flies out. I haven't processed it through the old cabeza yet. And so I really got to watch that. But that's what an external thinker will do. I need someone here to think. No, I will think out loud in a car. So if you pass me on the freeway, I'm not crazy. I'm thinking. Or you might be an internal thinker. And this is where, surprise, surprise, you're thinking in your head. And really, I'm really jealous of you. Because when it does come out of your mouth, it's usually intelligent. I say a lot of unintelligent things. But a challenge for you is going to be that we can't hear what you're thinking. And so sometimes my wife, who's an internal thinker, I need to remind her, it needs to come out of your mouth for me to know. Sometimes I wish that I could enter the mind of an internal thinker. And then I quickly talk myself out of that one because I know mine's a little crazy up here. I think everyone's is. Then you have different types of processors. You have quick, fast processors. And then you have deliberate processors. And so if you combine an internal thinking and deliberate processor, which often is the case, it's going to take a little while. And us external thinkers and quick processors tend to overrun them in communication. So these are important things just to know. Where would you put yourself? Internal, external, and quick and deliberate. And then where would you put your spouse? There might be lots of similarities between you two. There might be lots of differences. But it's good before we start anything else just to know that. And not one is bad and one is good. We tend to do that as people, don't we? Mark what we are either as good or bad, and whoever's not like us, the opposite of that. But it's just to acknowledge strengths and weaknesses. Like I said, there are strengths and weaknesses to each one of these. Like, I didn't talk about this, but in the quick processing, I'm very quick at processing, but my better thoughts come later. Like after the person leaves, do you ever get that? Like you have this conversation, you're like, oh, I wish I would have said this. Every time for me. I don't know about you, but every time. All right. So when you go into communicating, you're going to wear a hat. And this might sound a little foreign. We're going to go through this process that will take your communication and marriage to a whole nother level. I know it did for my wife and I. And that's that one of you is going to put the hat on of being the speaker. You get to say everything you want. No, you're going to have some rules. And then the other one's going to put the hat on of the listener. So I know this is really complicated, but your job is just to listen. And that's really hard for us, especially us that are quick external thinkers and quick processors and like to argue. But we're not going to, because that doesn't lead to effective communication. We're just going to wear one hat at a time. And by the way, you don't do this in all conversations. This is only around ones where there's a little tension involved. And you're going to ask your partner, hey, can you be the listener and I'll be the speaker? Or vice versa. In these moments, these are hot button issues. And they're filled with anxiety. Your heart gets racing, or your stomach gets in knots, or your mind is just whirling and you're coming up with all these wonderful arguments. that is a sign that anxiety is grabbing hold. And that's a sign you need to go to the speaker-listener model. If you're just talking, there's this nice back and forth. But if you ever noticed that when you're not just talking and it's around a hot button issue, that you may tend to fight, maybe raise the volume, or maybe you're a runner and one of you leaves the room, or you freeze and your mind stops working and you're like, don't notice me. Right? Those are our different reactions. And when we start that to happen, we can just go, hey, we need to step into the speaker and listener. And one thing that's really helped me is just to notice that's anxiety, one. And then here's the quick just diffuse. I'm not going to go fully into it. That'll be a different video. But you just want to notice that that's anxious and name as concretely as possible what you're anxious about. In that two-step little thing, oftentimes that will reduce most of our anxiety. If that doesn't work, please go for a walk. Don't try to have the discussion right then, right? And tell them, hey, let's talk about this in a minute. Because if you just leave the house and go for a walk when someone can tell you're elevated, it's going to panic them. So just, hey, I'm getting elevated. Just give me a second. I'm going to go for a walk and then we can talk about this. It's really valuable. You know, I'm a fighter and I want to have this conversation right now when I'm hot. But it works better for me with a little space. My wife's a natural run, so she likes to go for those walks. Like, get me out of here. But she just needs to let me know we're going to have the conversation, and it really relieves my heart. So remember, if you're an internal thinker, you got to tell them that you're going to be back. You're going to talk about it because they can't hear that up here. All right? And then we're going to start into this speaker listener. So here's kind of how to do it. If you're putting the speaker hat on, you're going to use I statements. So you're talking about yourself in this moment. You're talking about what your feelings are on the situation. And this is not an appropriate, I feel you suck is not good, right? Like, it's not helpful. But you're going to state something from your perspective on the situation that's not condescending to them. And this can get tricky in that moment because when we're anxious, we really want to go into this blame and judgment instead of just having a non-combative conversation, which happens with I statements. It doesn't mean you're not going to hurt their feelings. Usually these points of tension and feelings get a little hurt. But you're saying an I statement from your perspective, and not that they make you, but just how do you feel? And what were your expectations? Sometimes this requires a little time to think. Even us quick processors, please take a moment. Because what's really underneath there can be a little tricky. And then you're just going to say in an I statement, to the best of your ability, what's going on in your heart. And then the listener, you have one job again, and that's to listen. And it's listen to understand. So you're just understanding what someone's saying. And you're going to repeat it back in your own words, what they said. That's it. We need to remember that understanding does not mean agreeing. And when you're a listener, all you're trying to do is understand. You know, when we're in this moment of not listening to understand, we can be in this listening to interrupt, where we're going out of this speaker and listener thing and we want to speak because what they're saying is triggering us, or we want to argue. But remember, you're just understanding what they're saying. You're not agreeing to it. Okay, that's a high bar. There wouldn't be tension if you agreed. If you agreed, there'd be nothing to talk about. Everyone knows you don't agree. You're just trying to understand. You will have your turn, just so you know. But in this moment of just understanding, you're helping the speaker to unburden. In fact, in this process, when you do become the speaker, and we'll talk about that in a second, the other person has unburdened themselves to a point where they can actually hear you. If you cut it off early, they can't. And that's why we escalate, right? We might try to out-shout or out-articulate or out-pout. Like we could do all these different methods. But when we do this, it unburdens one so that the other can hear. And then there's this unburdening that happens in the other. And I have found I've been able to talk about subjects with my wife that honestly we just avoided in the past. And so you're listening to understand. And then here's the humble part. If you weren't humbled already, because I am every time I do this process, as the listener especially, but once they share and you've repeated back in your own words, you ask them if it's correct. Did I hear you correctly? And they get to say yes or no. If it's a no, ask them to try to explain it to you again. Use smaller words. No, whatever it is, just, hey, can you try again? I didn't fully understand what you were saying there. And then you're going to repeat it back. And then here's the humbling part. You're going to ask them, is there anything else? And my friend, I found there's always something else. Because we're like onions. And you're just going to continue this process. Like, they shared a layer. Is there anything else? They share another layer. Is there anything else? They share another layer. And every time you're doing this, you're repeating back in your own words. You're asking if it's correct. And they're revealing a little more and a little more. And what I've found is that about the third or the fourth layer is where we really get to the bottom of the issue. And it wasn't that they weren't honest with where they were at. It wasn't that I wasn't honest where we're at. It's that who can understand the heart? The Bible says, who can understand the heart? It's deceitfully wicked in all its ways. I don't think it's just talking about sin there. It's also like, it's a mystery even to us. And sometimes we don't know what's going on in us. We just know we're angry. And we're usually making it about that. And it really becomes about that. And it just takes some time to get to because we're human. And then once you've done that, and she says, there's nothing else. Now you've switched hats, and you become the speaker. And her job is to listen to understand. And you go through that whole process. And at the end, what happens is you come to an understanding. And sometimes that understanding is agreement. Sometimes that understanding is agreeing to disagree. It's not always we leave and it's kumbaya and we totally agree on everything. No, we're humans. You know, this two becoming one in marriage is like we are one and we're also separate. And so we're not always going to come to like a sameness. Marriage is not sameness. It is same direction. And those things are not the same thing. Because you can have many different directions. In fact, look at a river. And you have old dry beds, and then you have the well-worn path, but it's all going in the same. And I think marriage is kind of similar to that. Where yes, there's this two becoming one, and there's things that are a little different about you and a little different about her. And as it winds and shapes, and you listen to understand and you don't fix, you can get to know each other. And you could raise the level of your communication to another level that you haven't seen. So this process, though, I've messed up more times than I'd like to admit. And if you try this, you're going to mess up too. And that's okay. Because, my friend, all you got to do is do a do-over. And if you want to know how to do a do-over because you messed up, me too. And watch this video right here. I know it'll really help you.